The conflict between the two superpowers during the Cold War threatened the human race with extinction by massive nuclear exchange. During this period, a small but independent nuclear deterrence was also established by two European powers, the United Kingdom and France. Britain's strategic nuclear bombers, the V Force, provided her nuclear deterrent until 1969. They sat alert 24 hours per day, 365 days a year, with aircraft ready to launch at a moment's notice. France, too, had a nuclear bomber, the supersonic Mirage 4. This carried out a mission known as pre-strategic nuclear strike. The Mirage 4 has only very recently relinquished this role in favor of a more modern successor, the Mirage 2000N. After World War II, Britain and France still possessed some measure of influence in global affairs through their far-flung colonies around the world. But this influence was waning and had been taken over by the United States and the Soviet Union, which was aggressively expanding its influence in the name of worldwide communist revolution. In order to secure a continued place at the world's top table, Britain, and later France, embarked on the development of an independent nuclear deterrent, along with bombers capable of delivering such weapons. In 1947, the RAF Chiefs of Staff declared their belief that the possession of weapons of mass destruction would be the most effective deterrent to war itself. Exhausted by war, its economy seriously weakened, and with social issues a national priority, Britain nevertheless embarked upon a massive atomic arms development program. This produced not one, but 3 jet bombers, known as the V bombers on account of their names: Valiant, Victor, and Vulcan. The Royal Air Force's post-war heavy bomber force relied on the Avro Lincoln, a refined and re-engined derivative of the Lancaster. The Lincoln was hardly suitable as a means for delivering atomic weapons. The V bomber requirement was demanding. It called for a 4-engine jet bomber with a range of 8,000 kilometers, capable of delivering a 4.5-ton atomic device while flying at 500 knots and 15,000 meters altitude. It had to be developed in just 2 years for service in 1953. In the meantime, RAF Bomber Command operated B-29 superfortresses on loan from the U.S. Air Force. Known as Washingtons, they were intended as a stopgap measure, but gave much useful experience in operating a relatively modern aircraft. Only at this stage did a clear target emerge. By 1947, Stalin's plans for worldwide communist expansion had turned British attention east towards the Soviet Union. The V-bomber requirement posed huge technical risks. As an insurance, an interim requirement was issued calling for a bomber with reduced speed in ceiling. Short's Sperrin was the winner. Only 2 prototypes were built, and they gave valuable service as test aircraft in support of the V-bomber program. For the more demanding specification, the RAF received 6 proposals, which were eventually reduced to 3. The first of these was the Valiant, which pioneered many of the weapons and tactics for the V-bomber. The prototype first flew in May 1951. After further testing and development, production Valiant bombers were released for service into the Royal Air Force in 1955. The age of the V bomber had dawned. In all, the RAF received 104 production Valiants, the last being delivered in September 1957. These served as dual-role or triple-role bombers, tankers, and reconnaissance aircraft. Tanker capability was a most useful way of extending the V-bomber's range, and it was again the Valiant which undertook the lion's share of development work. One more first was claimed by the Valiant. 4 squadrons deployed to Malta in October 1956 to support Musketeer, the Anglo-French operation in Suez. The Valiant played a relatively minor role, dropping conventional bombs from medium altitude on Egyptian airfields. For its bomber design, Avro proposed a delta wing, a type of layout which had hitherto not been used on such a large aircraft anywhere in the world. Before committing to development of the bomber, Avro built 5 1/3 scale research aircraft for low and high speed testing of the delta wing configuration. In spite of the loss of the first aircraft, they validated the delta wing concept and provided much useful information for the Vulcan project. The Vulcan was the first of the new bombers to fly. The aircraft made an impressive sight as the Type 698 prototype was rolled out for its maiden flight in August of 1952. Its massive, almost perfect delta wing gave it the ability to cruise comfortably at high altitudes. It was as fast as a contemporary fighter, while at the same time, pilots praised its docile handling qualities. Displays at the Farnborough Air Show that year quickly followed, which demonstrated the Vulcan's fighter-like handling. In spite of its size, it could even be rolled easily. Flown with a stick, production Vulcans easily outmaneuvered fighters practicing intercepts against them at high altitudes. Completing the trio of V-bombers, the Victor became the last to fly on Christmas Eve, 1952. Like Avro, Handley Page also adopted an advanced wing design to meet the challenge of cruising at high subsonic speeds and at high altitudes. The most notable characteristic of the Victor was its crescent-shaped wing and high-set T-tail. Like the Avro 707, a similar research aircraft, the HP-88 was built to test this type of wing layout. This feature, a reducing wing sweep angle, ensures a constant Mach number along the entire length of the wing and generates very little transonic drag. With a top speed of 960 kilometers an hour at high altitude, the Victor was the fastest of all the V-bombers. Indeed, a clean Victor could break the speed of sound in a shallow dive. The Victor also handled well, although it lacked the Vulcan's fighter-like agility. More importantly, the Victor could fly higher, faster, and farther, and could carry a larger conventional bomb load. The Vulcan and Victor had their own strengths and weaknesses, yet they were so closely matched in performance that the RAF decided in June of 1952 to order 25 of each for squadron-level assessment. But in that event, The RAF could never bring itself to choose between the pair, and they continued to be ordered in parallel until late in their production careers. The production Vulcan B Mark I was flown in 1955, followed the next year by the Victor. The Vulcan B Mark I introduced more powerful Olympus turbojets, as well as a new kinked delta wing, which gave better handling and safety at high speeds. Deliveries began to number 230 Operational Conversion Unit at Waddington in August of 1956. The following July, number 83 Squadron formed as the first operational unit. Victors were delivered to the OCU at Gaydon in late 1957. Number 10 Squadron at Cottesmore became operational in April of 1958. Due to its strategic nuclear role, the V-Force was an elite one. Getting into a V-bomber was no easy task. The crews were the best and most experienced in the RAF. All captains had to have 1,750 flying hours in command. The Vulcan force was rapidly established, so that by the end of 1958, there were squadrons at Waddington, Finningley, and Scampton. By September of 1960, deployment in the Victor Mark I was complete, with 2 squadrons each at Cottesmore and Huntington. Unlike SAC bombers, which had some measure of defensive armament, the V bombers flew entirely unarmed. The strategy changed from 1960 on, when all aircraft began to be modified with a comprehensive suite of electronic countermeasures, warning and jamming equipment. By mid-1958, the UK deterrent had reached a credible level with the issuing of the first hydrogen bomb, Yellow Sun. Credibility hinged in no small measure on the ability of the V-bombers to evade not only the Soviet air defense arm, but also a preemptive strike on their bases. At the hub of the deterrent force was a group of 10 Class A airfields, which acted as the main bases for the V-bomber squadrons. Each was protected by Bloodhound surface-to-air missiles. In addition, at least 26 further UK airfields were designated as dispersal bases, ranging from fighter command stations to civil airports. More bombers could have operated from Britain's Mediterranean bases and in the Near East, further complicating the task of the defense. The main bases were spread throughout the Midlands and East Anglia. The V-bombers were assigned to numbers 1 and 3 groups of Bomber Command, with number 3 group of Valiants and Victors occupying the southern area.
7 stops, 80, 90, 100, 110, 120, check speed is okay, 130, 135.
During this period, V-Force bombers frequently practiced long-range deployments to overseas locations. Usually conducted singly, these were known as Lone Ranger. They went eastward to West Germany, Cyprus, Saudi Arabia, and southward to Kenya and Rhodesia. Western Rangers headed across the Atlantic, stopping at Goose Bay in Canada before continuing to SAC headquarters at Alfred in Nebraska. Vulcans also participated in SAC's annual bombing contest. A close relationship and joint nuclear targeting developed between the V-Force and SAC, which incorporated the RAF bombers into its nuclear strike plan in 1958. Across the Channel, France had already begun to establish her own independent nuclear deterrent. Just 2 years after the first Valiants entered service, plans were underway for a bomber to equip her Force de Frappe, whose operations would closely match those of the V-Force. The requirement was just as challenging, as unlike Britain's V-Force, France's airborne nuclear delivery system would be supersonic. Dassault was chosen to build the aircraft, to be known as the Mirage 4. When the first of 4 prototypes was rolled out, it was seen that the design was essentially a scaled-up version of the single-seat Mirage 3 Delta Wing fighter, albeit some 50% larger and with twice the wing area, thrust, and weight. The Mirage 4 first took to the air in June 1959. In spite of its size, performance was astounding. A top speed of Mach 2.2 at altitude closely matched that of the fighter. The Mirage 4 became operational with the Force de Frappe in 1964. Now all 3 of the wartime Allied big powers possessed the ultimate weapon of destruction. In Britain, the new decade of the 1960s brought improved versions of V-bomber. The stopgap Valiant was not considered for further improvement, but both Vulcan and Victor were extensively modified. The Vulcan B Mark II introduced a new large-span wing, together with uprated Olympus jets and a comprehensive ECM equipment fit. The new wing, with a dramatic double-kinked leading edge, greatly improved high-altitude performance, as well as extending range by 50%. The Victor B Mark II introduced Conway turbofans with twice the power of the B-1 Sapphire turbojets. Coupled with a slightly longer wingspan, these also improved high-altitude performance and range. Vulcans and Victors began low-level training in 1963. Changes in weaponry were also needed to keep the deterrent effective, so that during the 1960s, 3 methods of delivery were employed. Mark I versions of the Vulcan and Victor had progressed to an improved version of the Yellow Sun freefall bomb, which required them to make a pop-up maneuver to release the weapon from medium altitude over the target. B-2 Vulcans at Coningsby and Victors at Cottesmore were issued with the new British-designed freefall bomb, the WE-177. This was a laydown weapon intended for low-level release. Completing the trio was the Avro Blue Steel, a rocket-powered short-range nuclear missile with its own navigation system. Powered by highly volatile fuel, Blue Steel proved to be notoriously difficult to integrate onto both Vulcan and Victor. Modifications had to be made to the bomb bays and avionics to accommodate the weapon. But at long last, there was no need for the bomber to approach heavily defended areas. Blue Steel could be released from 185 kilometers away. It climbed to 21,000 meters before diving onto its target at Mach 1.8 and detonating a 1 megaton warhead. The weapon had to have a folding tail fin to fit the reduced ground clearance of the Victor's low undercarriage, and fueling it proved to be one of the most potentially hazardous occupations in the RAF. Avro built 57 production Blue Steel missiles, which were shared among 5 V-bomber units. The weapon became operational in late 1962, equipping 2 Victor squadrons, numbers 100 and 139, at Wittering, as well as 3 squadrons of the Vulcan wing at Scampton. These were numbers 27, 83, and 617, the famed Dam Busters. An improved version of Blue Steel was canceled in favor of an American weapon. The Douglas Skybolt was an air-launched ballistic missile with a range of 1,600 kilometers. Unfortunately for the RAF, the U.S. government canceled the Skybolt program in late 1962. Britain was subsequently forced to buy Polaris submarine-launched missiles to maintain its independent deterrent. At a stroke, the raison d'etre of the V-Force was removed. A tactical form of WE-177 is now carried by the Vulcan successor, the Panavia Tornado interdictor strike aircraft. Unlike the V-bombers, the development of other strategic nuclear delivery systems did not affect the Mirage 4 as drastically. By 1976, France had completed her nuclear triad with the deployment of both submarine and land-launched ballistic missiles. But Mirage 4s still formed an integral component of the Force de Dissuasion, carrying the 65-kiloton AN-22 laydown weapon. The standoff weapon finally arrived in 1980 when 18 Mirage 4s were converted to IBP standard to carry the ASMP missile. They also acquired a new Antelope 5 ground mapping radar and modern navigational attack system. The IBP ASMP combination entered service in 1985. Over 30 years of Mirage 4 operations came to an end in 1996. It had been augmented and then fully replaced in the nuclear strike role by its successor, the Mirage 2000N. Based on the combat trainer variant of the Mirage 2000 fighter, this two-seat aircraft will take France's strategic nuclear forces into the 21st century. Throughout the Cold War, Britain and France's independent nuclear deterrence symbolized their status as global powers. In view of the mightiness of the U.S. Strategic Air Command, it is unlikely that these greatly troubled Moscow. Yet the prospect of over 140 V-bombers and a smaller number of Mirage 4s attacking every major city in the Western Soviet Union undoubtedly counted as a third and important factor in the power equation. The majesty of these graceful bombers will never be eclipsed.